today's World Insight with Tian Wei. Health is wealth. Will Africa gain wealth through health? 3 African health ministers talk exclusively to World Insight on Africa's pharmaceutical industry. And could China and the U.S. avoid the Thucydides Trap? A leading U.S. scholar reflects upon decades of his research on the occasion of the China-U.S. trade conflict. Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. The Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit will be held in Beijing early next month. Ahead of the summit, representatives from China, Africa, and various international organizations have attended a meeting on health cooperation in Beijing last weekend. Health cooperation has been a major theme of cooperation between China and Africa, covering areas of disease treatment and ways to improve the pharmaceutical industry. Before we get down to the discussion with 3 health ministers coming from the African continent, let's take a look at this first.
A busy yet constructive agenda awaits President Xi Jinping and African leaders on September 3 and 4 in Beijing. On Wednesday, State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi announced details of the 2018 Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Health cooperation was the focus of a 2-day high-level meeting in Beijing last weekend, which also provided an important platform for collective dialogue ahead of the forum this September.
Through technical cooperation and various projects, China and Africa continue to blaze new trails in health cooperation. Some of these projects include the construction of disease control and prevention centres, human resources development, and implementing local production of medicine.
As one of the 10 major plans from the 2015 Johannesburg Summit, China-Africa health cooperation has grown with support from the World Health Organization under the United Nations. In recent years, China has steadily helped Africa improve its public health systems and pharmaceutical industry. This kind of help has been critical in curbing the spread of some deadly diseases. China has sent medical teams with donations of equipment and medicine to Africa. Shared expertise has led to local resources being used for producing drugs, expanding the market, and developing pharmaceutical research and technology. But huge challenges remain. In Africa, poverty and infectious diseases such as Ebola are weighing down the health system. Complicated political and security situations also hamper health efforts in some regions. There is still a long way to go in providing universal health care on the continent of Africa.
Sitting here, we have the Minister of Health coming from Nigeria, Minister Isaac Adewole.
Thank you.
Good to see you, sir.
It's a pleasure.
Joining us in the middle of the team, we have the Minister coming from Tanzania, Madam Minister Umi Mwalimu.
Yes.
Good to see you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
What a pleasure. Last but certainly not least, coming from Zambia, Minister of Health, Chitalu Chilufya. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you so much indeed.
Why is it important building pharmaceutical industry in your country?
Pharmaceutical sector is so critical to health system strengthening. If we have to ensure that we have universal health coverage, we have to fix one fundamental pillar of health systems, that's the supply chain. So the pharmaceutical sector is such an important component of the health systems. So why it is important to produce locally, you need to shorten the lead time. And it's important as you shorten the lead time to ensure that other ripple effects accumulate to the country, such as employment creation, prevention of capital flight, so that you don't damage the economy, and also importantly, capacity building in country, so that you build capacity locally in production.
Right.
So as you partner with the private sector, yes, they're producing, but you also have an opportunity to train production pharmacists. Critically, it is important to note that Africa imports over 90% of its pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
Now, that in itself not only predisposes Africa to fake products, but it also predisposes Africa to drug stockouts.
The little resources we have, we are basically changing into foreign currency in order to get medicine.
Right.
We are relying on foreign regulatory bodies. We want to rely on whether to ensure quality and safety of the medicine.
Of course, these are important, but very hard to meet.
African government, including Tanzania, we have already created the enabling environment to support the local production of pharmaceuticals industry. For example, in Tanzania, we have already adopted tax incentive to make sure we encourage investors to come and invest in Tanzania. We have already prepared the market within Tanzania, within East Africa and Southern African region.
What are the measures you are specifically talking about? Can you give us one or two examples?
Number one, for example, we have cut taxes for local production of pharmaceuticals.
How much?
For corporate tax from 30% to 20%. We have already also adopted zero VAT tax for locally produced packaging materials for pharmaceutical industries.
I see.
All we are doing this, we want to make sure we encourage local production of pharmaceuticals in order to address the challenges.
Mr. Minister, I wonder whether it's the same thing with your country as well.
Well, they are quite similar in Nigeria. Our president has issued what we call executive orders, one of which is designed to ease the challenges of doing business in Nigeria. For example, you will get visa on arrival. We will provide land. We will also allow you to repatriate your profit. In addition to that, we will also ensure that we keep strictly to some of the new incentives that are bound in the country. When you import raw materials for pharmaceuticals, the tariff is 0%. When you bring in finished products, you pay between 15 and 20% tax on the product.
As we all know, pharmaceutical industries, one of the most important things is about quality.
Correct.
Drugs, if it is not serving the purpose, actually is killing people.
Yes,
So consequence is much bigger than any other product. Even China and India, which have been termed as so-called the emerging economies, they have problems with quality control, as being demonstrated recently with some case studies. So how to make sure, when working with these countries, whether developing or emerging or developed countries, that you are getting the real product, the real quality, first of all. And secondly, particularly when localizing it, the quality control, how to make sure that will be the most important component of everything.
For example, in Tanzania, we have a national regulatory body, Tanzania Food and Drug Authority, which is ISO accredited.
Yes.
So it is well recognized within Southern Africa.
But, you know, Madam Minister, I have to argue that many of those administrations for quality control about drugs around the country, around the world, are actually ISO qualified.
Yes.
But still, there are problems.
I do want to acknowledge their problem, but they are very, very efficient, very professional. We follow even the European standard. Whatever has been actually approved by Tanzania Regulatory Authority body, it is also going to be acknowledged by European Union standard. So for that particular issue related to quality, it is not a big deal. That's why for us, we think local production of medical products in Tanzania, it is also one of the initiatives to guarantee Tanzanians that whatever they get from the company has standard of quality and safety to their life.
I see. It is crucial, the quality.
It is crucial, yeah.
Mr. Minister.
The situation is similar in Nigeria. We're quite
We're
concerned.
always into solidarity, it seems.
Yeah, because we have a common platform, the African Union, and that has also given us the opportunity to network and also work together. So we're quite interested in the quality of the product and ensuring that, one, we look at the quantity and also ensure that we have the right medication within the medicine. Because it is possible that you have fake product. It is also possible you have substandard. you also have inadequate quantity. And so we're partnering with universities. We're setting up quality control laboratories for the Nigerian Agency for Food, Drug Administration and Control, NAFDAC. And we're also planning to set up a bioequivalence laboratory very soon, and to make sure that we are able to measure that the so-called drug that has 500 milligrams of a medication truly has 500 milligrams, not 300, not 250.
That's right.
So I think we are quite concerned about this.
Fake products, for example, particularly fake drugs, has a lot to do with the corrective process in which it was certified, produced, and examined and checked. So every special point along this long process of producing drugs and medicine are all important.
Correct.
That is the sophistication part of it, and that is the most difficult part of it.
I think we will address this quality by looking at it from end to end.
Go ahead.
Right from the country of production down to the time it is shipped until it gets to our country. So we can gather. But many of these can be bypassed when those drugs are produced locally. You bypass critical components of the supply chain system if you produce local. And that's one of the greatest benefits of local production. Because you are actually cutting into almost 50% the chain. And so it's much easier. And in partnership, because some of these companies are operating in partnership, they will also want to keep their brand, they will also want to retain their reputation, and to me that is critical to many of them.
This is exciting what you're doing right there in your country, but certainly it's very challenging because you have to start everything from scratch, almost.
No, we are not really starting everything from scratch, because we have actually laid down the foundation.
Yeah, but now your different areas of working have been increasing, and you have to make sure they're balanced.
Of course. Now we are talking even emerging and re-emerging diseases, for example, Ebola and dengue fever, whatever. So what is important for us as the government of Tanzania, it is our passion, our vision to become a middle-income country through industrialization. So one area which we have identified is local production of pharmaceutical. We know it will not only enhance accessibility and affordability of pharmaceutical products, but also it will create employment, it will also bring the taxes to the government.
Drug quality is one of the biggest health concerns in Africa. Political stability and security also have an impact on the continent's universal health care system. With these challenges, how are Africa's health authorities coping? What about efforts to encourage local drug production? African health ministers told me their thoughts in the interview. Is the politics stable? What we are talking about today are still likely to be the plan for tomorrow?
One of the beauty of Africa is the fact that Africa is becoming more and more stable. Military intervention is becoming an abnormality. Since the intervention in Gambia, our leaders dispatched troops to Gambia and brought out and restored civil rule in Gambia. And so, for many of our countries, stability is becoming the order of the day. And that's one of the things we are selling.
Okay. Mr. Minister from Zambia.
I must state that Zambia has been a peaceful haven and therefore the right destination for investment. But as my colleagues have said, generally Africa has become more stable, and Africa is a place to invest because the population is there, the market is there, you know, so the demand is there, and now the environment is being enabled. The politics, today Africa is boasting of political will to improve health systems, because Africa is unanimous that sustainable development is linked to the health of its people.
But come on, I mean, you all know, Mr. Minister and Madam Minister, the world is changing. Very dramatically, I should say. At this point, geopolitics unpredictable, as we all know, and therefore that's likely to have a big impact on Africa as well, like it or not. What about these vulnerabilities, Mr. Minister?
Well, every country is vulnerable. But when you look at it, I think things are taking a turn for the better. We're vulnerable to floods, to disasters, and so on. But when you look at it, Africa is free from earthquakes, free from tornadoes, all the serious things that afflict other countries, we are free from it. The only affliction we have has been military coups and instability, which is becoming a thing of the past.
Where does the money come from? That's another important issue, isn't it?
A resilient health system is anchored by a robust healthcare financing program. Africa needs to do more to increase domestic financing, become less reliant on donor funding, but we must increase our allocation towards our health programs in the country. Where does the money come from? We must innovate. We must ensure we set up innovative financing mechanisms. In Zambia, we've passed a law called the National Health Insurance Act, number 2 of 2018, which has introduced compulsory health insurance. Now, that pooled funding, that solidarity, inclusivity, it reduces the premiums and also creates or is a significant step towards universal health coverage. But we must also look at sin taxes, the sin of smoking and drinking. We must ensure that industry becomes more responsible. We must ensure that while we discourage smoking, if not ban smoking, we must ensure that the industries, actually the taxes we pay, we get from there going to healthcare, including alcohol.
That, of course, is the innovative way of doing things, but at the same time, Madam Minister, the IMF funding, for example, many of the African countries are working with, are not necessarily going to be a guarantee for your investment mechanism. It's going to be only a proportion of. Meanwhile, the international aid coming from developed economies, as we have seen over the past decade, have been decreasing. Thirdly, China and some of the other emerging economies are willing to work with Africa. But certainly, they all have their own issue to struggle with as well when it comes to economy and trade. So, Madam Minister, where does the money come from?
It does actually. First of all, we do recognize we cannot rely on foreign support. So we have increased domestic allocation to address healthcare challenges in Tanzania. For example, last financial year, it was 9.5% of the national spending. Right now, it has gone up to 10.80%. But like in Zambia,
thanks to your hard work.
Yes, but because at the end of the day, it is very easier to convince the minister responsible for finance to give you more money if you deliver. So they just want to see results. Like in Zambia, we are going to introduce a mandatory health insurance. So Tanzania's population is about 55 million. So maybe if we get 70% of households covered by health insurance, they will be basically contributing.
But what would be the minimum amount they have to pay for that? We all know there's a different, families with different income levels.
We are thinking maybe the minimum amount could be $10 US.
I see.
Yeah,
for a year.
For a year, for a household of 6 people. But we are also considering we have already developed our health financing strategy, like in Zambia with the support of the World Bank. So we want also to maybe get some money from sin taxes, for example, or from sugar importation, because we want also to address non-communicable disease. So while we acknowledge and appreciate the support of our partners, we also want to do our job. We have to increase domestic allocation.
Of course, there's one important issue that we haven't touched on. That is, with all of these wonderful ideas and some of the important things for you to figure out, for example, about funding and others, what is the best mechanism to work on this? You touched a bit about your domestic system in each country. But on the other hand, you have many options. For example, you can work with international organizations. You can work with the NGOs. You can also work with different kinds of governments, China included, with the Belt and Road and many other initiatives. But how to weave them in the best and the most efficient way to provide the best answer to your country?
We cannot do away with international partners. But what we also do in Nigeria, which is different, is to network with the private sector. There is a lot of resources.
To bring the vitality within.
Yes. The private sector has a lot of resources. They have efficiency. They have discipline. And we thought that creating the convenience, a marriage of convenience between the public and the private sector will help to drive our agenda forward within the context of, and then we're setting a priority as a nation. And we're telling our partners, this is our priority. Come and join us with us to move the health sector forward. And I think this is what will be sustainable.
All right, Madam Minister.
Yeah, for us it is almost the same like Zambia and Nigeria. We have already defined our priorities. While we continue working with partners, including international organizations, but we have always actually insisted the importance of coordination among partners, because sometimes you may find one or two partners addressing one or two same activities. So we want coordination of partners in order to make sure we have got a bigger impact. But number two, private sector engagement is very, very important right now, and civil society organization. I just want to give an example of tuberculosis in Tanzania. Before, I didn't give the private sector any money, but I called them. I want you to work with me in order to detect TB cases. They said, Madam Minister, we are going to work with you. When they decided to do that, they increased case detection for the tuberculosis from 5.4% to 10%. I didn't give them a single dollar.
But only a policy.
A policy,
and
because I
attitude
encourage
to work with
you
them.
are right.
Exactly.
Yeah, they just need to be recognized and appreciated. But another important, we shouldn't ignore the role of the community. It's very, very important. Some intervention can be even implemented within the community without even spending any financial resource. Just the involvement and engagement of the community.
Before we go, one crucial question to ask the three of you. You are here not long before the China-Africa Summit for Development. What from the Minister of Health is expecting that the national leaders, when they conclude that summit, will come up with when it comes to the area of your expertise?
FOCAC should be an opportunity to drive a people-centered, sustainable development program.
My expectation, a focus on promoting local investment on local production of pharmaceuticals.
I see. And Mr. Minister, last but not least.
For us in Nigeria, China is noted for investment in infrastructure, railways, airports, roads. We want to see a recalibration of China's investment in Africa away from hard infrastructure to soft infrastructure, and more investment in the people of Africa, with a strong focus on health of our people.
So it could be a win-win for everybody.
It will be a win-win.
All right. With that confidence, we have to wrap up today's discussion. This is an absolutely fascinating topic, and congratulations, you have a country and a continent on its way up. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Mr.
Thank you so
Minister
much.
and Madam Minister. So stay with us here on World Insight, still to come on today's program. History could tell us valuable lessons in fixing today's conflicts. Professor Allison, the proponent of Thucydides Trap, may be onto something in understanding China and U.S. relations. That history lesson from Professor Allison right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. It's usual for the U.S. President Donald Trump to say something outrageous and catch the media headlines. For example, calling overseas students in the U.S. spies, which a political source say was a thinly veiled reference to China. Well, the White House declined to comment on the report. It has sparked heated discussions on the social media. In tonight's special commentary, Wade the World, I raised several points why the U.S. president should not get away with fear-mongering to get his way. We hope he didn't say those words, but if he did, he is really making a big mistake. I'm hardly a fan of Trump quotes. However, what he said at a dinner with top business leaders earlier this month has really reached the lowest point of not even an American president, but any individual. He reportedly said, quote, almost every student that comes over to this country, namely America, is a spy. According to the Political report, which got the quote from an unnamed attendee of that dinner, at one point during the dinner, Trump noted an unnamed country that the attendee said was clearly China. When asked, though, by Political to clarify, the White House declined. Even today, neither the White House nor Donald Trump himself have been able to comment publicly about the report. But one thing is for sure, those words reportedly said by the U.S. president are nothing but malicious racial accusation against the Chinese. And that should be condemned by everybody. Obviously, those remarks from Mr. Trump were intended to incite fear, panic, and hysteria among American business circles and the American society as a whole about China, about the young Chinese in the United States. These Chinese students are like students from any other country that study and live in America, who are bridges for friendship between the United States and other countries. As we all know, the quality and texture of any bilateral relationship has more to do with people-to-people relations than anything else. Chinese students account for more than 30% of total overseas students in the U.S. That demonstrates the fact that the two of the world's largest economies, China and the United States, are great countries that are interacting with one another through great ambassadors and messengers, which creates a big potential. However, Mr. Trump's baseless and racial accusations could lead to general suspicion and fear among the American public about this most active and important link of the two nations, and could also drive the two nations and the two peoples ever more apart. One might naturally wonder who are going to benefit from it, as China and the United States are at a critical juncture of their bilateral relations right now. The unfounded racial accusation from Mr. Trump against young Chinese people are leading us to more concerns, not only about bilateral relations, but also which road the United States, a more than important player in today's world, is taking. For those who have learned a little bit about the contemporary history of the United States, Trump's unfounded accusation against Chinese students sound more than alarming. It bears strong similarity to those of McCarthyism practiced in the 1950s and 60s during some of the darkest days of American history. McCarthyism was used as a tool then by politicians to create fear among the Americans about other countries and other peoples, to create political momentum for Cold War mentality domestically, and to control the hearts and minds of Americans. It made victim of many outstanding American citizens, government employees, Hollywood actors and actresses, prominent writers, minority groups, union members, and the list goes on. But now, the question is whether Mr. Trump intends to create once again fertile ground to demonize one country and one people, this time the Chinese, and tragically, a possible repetition of the shameful days of American contemporary history. Mr. Trump said repeatedly that he's eager to create jobs and bring down trade deficits the U.S. has with other countries, but one might wonder if he really means what he said. Why? Well, more than 350,000 Chinese students studied in the U.S. last year. They are just as students from elsewhere in the world in America, bringing vitality and wealth to the country. For example, Chinese students contributed $12.5 billion to the U.S. economy last year alone, not to mention the many academic, business, and people-to-people exchange opportunities they are creating through their families, their friends, and their networks. If Mr. Trump does not even recognize this fact and trend, he's only lying about his slogan of making America great again. Many Chinese students over the decade study in America and contribute in unprecedented way to the success of the United States. There are 8 American scientists with Chinese origin winning Nobel Prize, for Christ's sake. However, we still have seen groundless racial accusations against people of Chinese origin in the United States, from Dr. Wen-Ho Lee to Dr. Xiao Xingxi to Ms. Sherry Chen. They were unjustly prosecuted based on suspicion of their ancestry, but were later found to be innocent of wrongdoing. But their lives have been totally destroyed as a result. Now, Mr. Trump is zeroing in not only on individuals, but the whole group of young Chinese students who happen to be studying in America to learn how to be better people and how to build a better world. I'm Tian Wei, and this is Wei the World. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. So what does history tell us about relations between the current and ascendant world power? For some answers, I have spoken to Graham Allison, a prominent American political scientist. He has been heavily involved in the U.S. foreign and defense policy in the 1960s and 70s when the U.S. was dealing with the former Soviet Union. He is best known for coining the term Thucydides Trap to refer to the situation when a rising power causes concerns in an established power which escalates towards war. He used the term to illustrate the relationship between the United States, the existing power, and China, the rising power. He said the Thucydides Trap is something both countries should avoid. With the trade war going on between China and the U.S., the question now is, what can be done to nip it in the bud? Thucydides Trap, something you warned between China and the United States. Is it on the way to come, given the latest trade dispute?
I would say that Thucydides is probably watching carefully and saying everybody is on script. So unfortunately, I think the storyline looks like it's emerging. Yeah.
What exactly is that storyline?
Well, the storyline is with a rising power, like Athens 2,500 years ago, or Germany 100 years ago, or China today, threatens to displace a ruling power, like the U.S. today. In general, the outcome is a war, a catastrophic war. Now, not in all the cases. I look at the last 500 years, I find 16 cases when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, 12 of them in war, 4 of them in not war. So to say war inevitable would be a big mistake. So we hope this will be the fifth case of no war, not the 13th case.
You could argue now things are more connected than ever before.
Yes.
And probably this is a good thing.
Yes, and because that provides some ballast in the relationship. We have a great stakes in working together, but in this relationship in which, on the one hand, China feels bigger, stronger, deserves more say, more sway, feels like it's being confined, and the Americans think, wait a minute, we have to cling to the status quo because this is the order that's provided all.
Is the 60 billion tariffs on Chinese goods a sign of U.S. trying to maintain its power? Is that how it is?
I think Thucydides would say that's the kind of thing the ruling power might do, being threatened and fearful of the rising power, and imagining that these small actions would have some impact when actually they may be counterproductive.
That's exactly what I meant. In a way, is it going to help the incumbent power, or is it going to hurt the incumbent power?
Again, Thucydides would tell us that the behavior is one thing. It's thought to be constructive, but it's often destructive. So if you look at the ways in which Sparta felt obliged to come to the relief of Corinth, even though it didn't like Corinth, and thought Corinth was acting against its interest, it still felt, I should do this, and then one thing leads to the other, and pretty soon they find themselves where they don't want to be. And I think a trade conflict in particular, if it escalated, could get both China and the U.S. doing things that, even though they don't make any sense, their blood is up, they're feeling the other one is pushing me around, and under those circumstances it becomes very dangerous.
Do you think the U.S. side would have any way of coming back to logic?
I certainly hope so, because I live in the U.S.
But what is backing you of thinking and hoping so?
Well, I say partly that I'm an optimistic person. I'm always hopeful. But I think that in the dynamics of the U.S., often there's an overreaction at one stage to which then the rest of the system pushes back a bit. And I think as people look at the danger in the relationship between the U.S. and China, there's some reason for thinking that it'll stabilize. But I would say not yet. And if I were betting, things will get worse before they get worse.
You mean the tariffs will be even higher?
Well, I think the 90 days is the beginning of it, but I think an even more interesting, and what Thucydides again teaches us, is that in this tense relationship or this dangerous dynamic, each misunderstands the other. So even when one or the other is trying to be helpful or trying to be more sensible, The other says, oh, well, I think it has an ulterior motive. So I think the risk of misunderstanding is very great, and then when you have great misunderstandings, the risk of misjudgments and mistakes become very large. So I think that's why communication between people and between the governments is so important.
Communication, whether it is successful or not, is based on trust, to a certain extent.
To a certain extent, yes.
But we are not seeing many cases of trust between this administration in Washington, D.C. and the current Chinese government, for example. We haven't seen anything that would come here as the basis for trust, do we?
Well, it's a good question. So I think that sometimes Chinese talk about mutual trust, but if you look at the statement in the 19th Party Congress, it backs up a little bit, and it says mutual respect rather than trust. So I may not trust you, but I may have enough respect for you that we talk with each other, and I'm not sure you're telling the truth all the time. You're not sure I'm telling the truth all the time, but we're talking and we're listening and we're trying to understand. So I would say the first instance, mutual respect and some appreciation for each other's core interests.
One of the things, Professor Allison, is whether we have in your system any forces that would help to go back onto the track of discussion and negotiation.
Well, I think that they are in the system, so, and I think they will be even more so.
Who are they?
So the business community is one part, and especially the parts of the business community that know that they have the biggest stakes in China. So there's a lot of American companies that are very active in China. There's a lot of trade between the U.S. and China. There's a lot of people who consume goods that are made in China. So all those voices, as they discover that their interests are being threatened, will become, I think, more important. Whether they'll be sufficient to deal with the Trump administration, which has a very strong view on this matter, and a very unusual view, that is at least a view that's sharply different than the consensus view for the previous 3 or 4 decades, that's an uncertainty. Yeah.
People have been using the analogy of adult and child. I'm not sure whether it is the most appropriate to discuss of the matters between states, but the question is, the apparent child has a lot of power in hand. Where is the stabilizing factor that you are talking about?
My hope is that as we recognize the stakes for each of the parties, that you'll find more people in the system, in Congress, of which there are a number of people, in the business community, in the think tank community, and academic community like myself, saying, let's try to understand the bigger picture in which we have many vital interests between the U.S. and China, have been having serious competition. Can be very constructive, but it needs to be within a framework. So I think what we need to be doing is thinking how in this difficult transition and in this difficult dynamic, because it is true that China is getting bigger and stronger, and it is true that that has an impact on Americans and their consciousness and their role in the world. So trying to cope with this requires a great leap of imagination.
My exclusive interview with Allison, the author about the Thucydides Trap. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.